Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. It is just so wonderful to have you here tonight, and I just want to send my love to everybody out there who is fascinated by Bigfoot. I really appreciate and love you all, so thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate it so very much. And I've got such a lovely story for you that is just going to be just up your street. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. But this story is about a grandmother who actually happened to be sitting watching a Bigfoot program on television. And that was when she admitted to her granddaughter that she'd actually had an encounter with these creatures. And it's quite a story. So let's get started. I think you're going to enjoy it. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Charlotte, although people call me Lottie for short. I am from Clarksburg, West Virginia, and it was during the COVID-19 epidemic that my mother decided that my grandmother should move away from her retirement home and in with us. She was naturally worried about my grandmother being exposed to the virus because she's in her 80s and as a result is more vulnerable than most to succumb to its inevitable dangers. It has been lovely having my gran around, and she's such a fun person to have in our home. One day my sister and I were watching a television show called Finding Bigfoot. My gran was sitting on the sofa and knitting, and then her face went as white as a sheet, and she looked at me and said, "Those creatures are real. I've seen them myself many times when I was younger, but I never told anyone about it in case they thought I'd lost my marbles." So this is the story she recounted to me that I believe you and your listeners will find intriguing. In those days, it was the late 50s, I was living in a cabin in the countryside with my husband. We had ubiquitous trees, rolling hills, and beautiful valleys with plenty of outdoor space on our land. One day I was washing dishes at the sink. Even in those days, I had a lovely kitchen with a large window overlooking my kitchen garden, where I grew a large range of vegetables like carrots, tomatoes, spinach, potatoes, lettuces, beans, and pumpkins. Those vegetables were so much sweeter and more delicious than the stuff we buy today. My tomatoes were so different to the tomatoes we taste now. It was like an explosion of delicious sweetness in your mouth, maybe because the soil was so much richer back then. I could see the joy on my grandmother's face as she recalled those wonderful early memories of her younger days. Suddenly something got my attention because I noticed this large cinnamon brown form sitting on my vegetable patch and pulling my carrots up by the roots and eating them, roots and all. At first I thought it was a bear because it was well covered with hair, but I suddenly noticed how long those arms were, and I could distinctly see human hands. The creature got up on his two legs and walked over to my tomato plants. It was then that I realized he was not a bear. The first thing I felt was total shock and disbelief, because I did not know what this creature was, and that anything like this even existed in North America. If it did, I had never heard of it. What was it, I wondered? I was so intrigued and curious about the creature, but I was never afraid, not ever, not even once. The creature gave me the impression of being a gentle soul that was of great intelligence. I think the thing that fascinated me about this creature was his distinctly human traits. Although there was certainly some primate in his genealogy, that was very clear to me. All I can say is that I felt privileged to be seeing a creature like this that I am sure not many people have seen, and it excited me a lot. It made me feel special because this creature had revealed itself to me. Why? I do not know. The creature was tucking into my tomatoes and eating them like an apple. Suddenly I think he must have sensed I was watching him because he looked up at me directly through the window with the kindest, most beautiful brown eyes. In those seconds, our eyes met, and I tried to tell him telepathically that he was welcome to my vegetables. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt that he knew that what I was saying. He did not run away, but walked over to the beans and squatted on the ground with his back feet and continued to eat. All the time he must have felt me watching him, but he wasn't concerned, not one little bit. After he finished eating, his eyes turned to look at me, almost as if he was thanking me, and then he literally glided over the fence into the surrounding valleys with such grace and speed. It was beautiful to watch. Over several years, that creature was a regular and a constant visitor in my garden, much like our feathered friends. It surprised me that he felt so comfortable around me. But if he did see the figure of my husband through the kitchen window coming into the kitchen, he would dart away very quickly and vanish from sight. That creature was fast, and when he ran, it was like the wind. He would move so fast, swinging his long arms backwards and forwards, as if he was marching. He was beautiful to watch because of his incredible grace. One of his strides was equivalent to 5 of our steps, and he would scale our 6-foot wall by just walking over it as if it was nothing. One day in winter, when the ground was covered in snow, I was surprised to see the creature squatting there and just looking up at me, and once again our eyes met. He stood there looking at me and then glided away on his long, densely muscular legs. I really got the impression that he was saying goodbye. Maybe he was moving away, I thought. I remember feeling desperately sad in those moments. I would say that 5 years went by and there was no trace of the creature, no sighting of him at all, and it was very sad for me because I truly missed him. But one day as I was washing the dishes, there he was, larger than life, sitting in my vegetable bed as if he had never left. This time he was with a female and a little childlike one that I imagined was their young sprog. All 3 of them were looking at me through the kitchen window, and I felt sure he was bringing his family to me to say hello and to introduce me to them. It really was the most wonderful feeling. I felt so humbled that this creature trusted me and thought so much of me that he wanted me to see his beautiful family. I noticed that over the 5 years he had grown a great deal. He had gained height, weight and girth and was now about 7 foot tall and 7 foot across. The female, I noticed, had small breasts, and she was about 6 foot and very slender, but very strong looking, while the little one was very cute, curious and comical, and I guess he was 4 foot tall. The female had a little auburn tint to her hair, and it was very mop-like in appearance compared to the other 2. The little one was exactly the same cinnamon brown colour of his father. That year I saw the family a few times. Sometimes I would leave apples, bananas and nuts out for them, which I would tell they really appreciated. One day I left out a jar of peanut butter for them, and the juvenile ran off with it. I watched him pull himself on top of a tree branch with one long arm. Then he sat on the branch, opened the bottle, throwing the top on the ground like it was a spinning wheel. Then with long, eager fingers, he dived into the jar and coated his fingers with a thick layer of sticky peanut butter. He licked it off his fingers with such appreciation, as if it was the most scrumptious ice popsicle he had ever tasted. I got the impression that he was not about to share this peanut butter with anyone, come what may. Mum was not having any of it, and I watched her chattering angrily with her little sprog up in the tree, and I could even hear by the tone of her voice that she was not happy with her little one. Looking at the way the creature climbed down the branch onto his mother's shoulders and reluctantly handed her the jar of peanut butter, I could tell he was in trouble. He hung his head in shame and avoided any eye contact with his mother once he was on the ground. In fact, he continued to stare at the ground, avoiding any eye contact at all for a very long time. It was hilarious to watch, it really was. One day my husband and I were moving to another cabin that was several miles away from our original one, and I never thought in a million years I would see those creatures again, and that broke my heart. But somehow they found me. I don't know how, but they did. Maybe it was through their sense of smell, I don't know. But one day in my new cabin, I saw all 3 of them again, and they visited my garden several times. But then one day they just never visited again. I think they moved away or went to another part of the world, but I rarely missed them. Did you ever tell Grandad about the creatures? I asked. No, never, my grandmother told me. You see, for some reason they did not want him to see them. Whether they were afraid of him or not, I have no idea, but they kept well out of his way. I do remember your grandfather telling me that someone had been in our vegetable patch who had enormous feet because he had found a muddy print in the sand. He went out into the garden to measure the footprint, and he told me that it could not be human because the feet were 19 inches in size. He was floored by that, I remember, and he was shocked that the feet were bare. One time he also commented that he had been hearing whistling in the garden and was concerned we had a trespasser on our land. He did look around our property but found nothing, only a big ball of brown hair that he found attached to a broken branch in a tree in our garden. I remember that hair mystified him greatly. I knew that that hair was from the creature because of its cinnamon color and texture of it. Did your neighbors ever see the creatures? I asked. Not as far as I know. I doubt that anyone saw them. And if they did, I doubt that they would have told us. Do you think those Bigfoots are still alive today? I asked my grandmother. I doubt it, she said, unless they do have a long life expectancy. But in my experience, large animals do not live the longest lives. Do not forget, these creatures are huge, and that would predispose them to shorter lifespans, I imagine, she said. I mean, look at large dogs, for instance. They live half as long as small ones do, and sometimes Great Danes can only live 5 to 7 years. I am no animal expert, but yes, I think he's more than likely deceased. I would imagine that maybe he has some great-great-grandchildren hanging around somewhere. I really hope so. Why do you think some people have really terrifying experiences with Sasquatches, Granny? I asked. I cannot speak for other people, she said, only for myself. I can assure you the creatures I saw had the loveliest, gentle, docile, easygoing natures. I know they would have never harmed me, and I do believe if I had been in trouble, they would have even gone as far as to help me. I do think they do like to be left alone, and I think they are elusive, because otherwise everybody would see them all the time. I imagine them to be territorial. I suppose, like humans, you get different personality traits. I mean, look at the people locked up in our prison systems. Some of them have engaged in brutal, heinous crimes and have no compassion in their hearts at all. There are a lot of evil people out there, but many of them we never get to meet because invariably they are made to account for their crimes, at least we hope they are. If you get humans so evil, why not Bigfoots too? Why should we be the only ones exclusive at being evil? If they do share some of our genealogy and human dispositions, why should we be surprised by the different encounters that people have? Just like our experiences with different people, so are our experiences with different Bigfoots. That's my story. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful story. I was actually just talking about that just now and saying that I really believe that Bigfoots do have different personality types. And it's just so true, because if you look at human beings, we're all so different. And you get really lovely people and you get not so lovely people. You get people who are genuinely kind and people who are selfish. You get people who are evil and people who are good. And so why should it be any different with the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot? I absolutely 100% agree with it. Because I have got so many people telling me about the most remarkably loving encounters. So there are different Bigfoot out there. You can have a really negative experience with a Bigfoot and a very positive one. And let's hope that any of us who have encounters with them will have a positive encounter if we're lucky enough to meet the hairy man. Until next time, love to every one of you in North America and the rest of the world. Love to all my Bigfoot followers, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, good night and goodbye.